My name is Alicia, and I'm 28 years old. I was reviewing patient charts when my phone exploded with calls from an unknown number. The manager of Le Bernardin was screaming that my parents had just finished a $3,200 dinner and told the staff I'd pay. I hadn't spoken to them in 6 months after discovering they'd stolen my identity. Racing to the restaurant, I found them laughing with my sister Bethany. My father's smirk said everything. Time you learned about family obligations. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever dealt with family members who felt entitled to your hard-earned money, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, what unfolds in this restaurant will leave you speechless, and I promise you'll want to hear how I finally broke free from their toxic grip. Growing up in my family felt like living in two different worlds. There was Bethany's world, where birthday parties were elaborate affairs with ponies and magicians, where designer clothes appeared in her closet without question, and where every achievement was celebrated with expensive rewards. Then there was my world, where birthday cards were often forgotten, where I wore Bethany's hand-me-downs despite being the older sister, and where my straight A's were met with comments like, "Well, that's expected of you." My parents, Harold and Diane, never tried to hide their favoritism. They had a story they loved to tell at family gatherings about how Bethany was their miracle baby after years of trying, while I was the practice child who came too early in their marriage. They'd laugh like it was the funniest joke, never noticing how I'd shrink into myself every time they told it. By the time I turned 10, I'd learned that love in our house came with a price tag, and Bethany's currency was worth more than mine. The financial exploitation started the day I turned 18. I'll never forget coming home from my high school graduation to find my parents in the kitchen with paperwork spread across the table. "Just sign here, sweetheart," my mother said, sliding a document toward me. "It's for your college fund access." Naive and trusting, I signed without reading. That signature would haunt me for the next decade. When I got to college that fall, excited to start my pre-nursing program, the financial aid office called me in for a meeting. My college fund, which my grandparents had set up with $50,000, showed a balance of $1,200. The rest had been invested, according to my parents. I called home in tears, and my father's response was casual, almost bored. "Investments go bad sometimes, Alicia. You'll have to figure it out like an adult." 3 weeks later, Bethany posted photos from her engagement party at the country club wearing a dress that cost more than my entire semester's tuition. The math wasn't hard to do. My college fund had been invested all right, invested in giving Bethany the wedding of her dreams, while I scrambled to take out emergency student loans. I worked 3 jobs through nursing school. Morning shifts at a coffee shop starting at 4:30, evening shifts at a grocery store, and weekend overnight shifts at a nursing home. My classmates would go out to celebrate after exams while I rushed to make it to work. My parents never offered help, but they'd call occasionally to complain about their bills or to brag about Bethany's latest achievement. The manipulation was an art form they'd perfected over years. When I couldn't afford to come home for Thanksgiving my junior year, my mother called every relative to tell them I was too good for family now. When I missed Bethany's baby shower because I had finals, my father sent a long text about how I was selfish and would regret prioritizing career over family. They'd mastered the art of public humiliation, always ensuring their criticism happened in front of audiences who would join their chorus of disappointment. During my final year of nursing school, the calls became more frequent and more urgent. There was always a crisis that needed immediate financial attention. The roof was leaking. The car broke down. Mom needed a medical procedure. Each time, they'd guilt me into sending whatever I could spare from my already tight budget. I lived on ramen and hope while they continued their comfortable suburban lifestyle. The worst manipulation came 2 months before graduation. My father called at 2 in the morning, voice shaking with tears I'd never heard before. Mom was in the hospital, he said. Emergency surgery. Insurance wouldn't cover everything. They needed $15,000 immediately, or she might not make it. I'll never forgive myself for what I did next, but fear and love are powerful motivators. I took out a personal loan with a predatory interest rate, maxing out what my credit would allow, and sent them every penny. 2 weeks later, Bethany posted vacation photos from Cabo. Mom and Dad surprised us with this amazing trip, feeling blessed. The caption might as well have been a knife to my chest. When I confronted them, my mother's response was clinical in its cruelty. "We never said I was dying, Alicia. We said it was an emergency." And it was. We desperately needed a vacation after all the stress you've put us through. After graduation, I threw myself into my career with the determination of someone who had everything to prove and nothing to lose. I took every overtime shift, worked every holiday, saved every penny I could while paying off the mountain of debt they'd helped create. Within 3 years, I'd worked my way up to head nurse of the cardiac unit, finally earning enough to breathe without checking my bank balance first. That's when I met David. He was a physical therapist who worked with our cardiac patients, and his kindness was so foreign to me that I initially mistook it for pity. When he asked me to coffee, I assumed he wanted to discuss a patient. When he showed up with flowers on our 3rd date, I actually asked if they were on sale. It took months of patient persistence for him to break through the walls my family had built around my heart. David came from the kind of family I'd only seen in movies. Parents who celebrated all their children equally, who offered help without strings attached, who said, "I love you," without following it with "but." The first time I had dinner with them, I kept waiting for the catch, for the moment they'd reveal what they wanted from me. Instead, his mother hugged me goodbye and said, "Thank you for making our sons so happy." I cried the entire drive home. 6 months ago, everything came crashing down in a way I should have seen coming but was too hopeful to expect. I was reviewing my credit report, preparing to finally buy my first home, when I discovered the betrayal that would end my relationship with my parents forever. There were credit cards in my name I'd never opened maxed out, and in collections. Utility bills from addresses I'd never lived at. Store cards with thousands in debt for purchases I'd never made. The investigation revealed the ugly truth. My parents had been using my social security number for years, that first signature at 18, giving them enough information to steal my identity repeatedly. The emergencies I'd helped with were often to pay minimums on cards they'd opened in my name. The $15,000 loan I'd taken out had saved them from bankruptcy on debts they'd accumulated pretending to be me. I confronted them with David by my side, bringing copies of every fraudulent account, every forged signature, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. My mother's response was to cry, not from guilt, but from anger at being caught. My father's was to threaten, saying they'd ruin my reputation, tell my employer I was unstable, destroy my relationship with David. Bethany sat in the corner silent for once, her face a mask I couldn't read. That was the last time I spoke to any of them. I filed police reports, began the long process of clearing my name, and changed every piece of personal information I could. The locks on my apartment, my phone number, my email addresses, everything that could give them access to my life was cut off. For 6 months I'd had peace. But peace, I was about to learn, was just the calm before the storm. My promotion to department head had been announced in the hospital newsletter, and someone had made sure my parents knew exactly how much their abandoned daughter was now worth. The game was about to begin again, but this time they'd miscalculated one crucial detail. This time I wasn't playing alone. Le Bernardin wasn't just any restaurant. It was the crown jewel of fine dining in our city, the kind of place where reservations were made months in advance, and where the wine list had its own dedicated sommelier. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents, who had eaten Kraft mac and cheese for dinner just as often as I had growing up, had chosen this particular stage for their performance. As I pushed through the heavy doors, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and anxiety, I understood immediately that this had been choreographed down to the last detail. The manager, a thin man with perfectly styled gray hair, practically pounced on me the moment I entered. "Miss Chen, I presume your parents assured us you would handle their bill, but given the substantial amount we need to verify..." His voice trailed off as he took in my appearance, clearly assessing whether someone in scrubs who had obviously rushed from work could afford what my parents had orchestrated. I followed him through the dining room, past tables of people who barely glanced up from their conversations, unaware they were about to witness a family destruction years in the making. Then I saw them. My parents sat at a corner table that offered perfect visibility to the entire restaurant, because of course they did. They wanted an audience. Bethany was there along with two women I recognized as her friends from social media, all of them laughing over what appeared to be the remains of a feast. The table was a testament to excess. Empty oyster shells lined up like soldiers, multiple wine bottles scattered across the white tablecloth plates that had clearly held Wagyu beef and lobster thermidor pushed aside to make room for what looked like a dessert sampling that could feed a small wedding. My father was gesturing grandly with a wine glass that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, telling some story that had the table in hysterics. "Alicia, darling, you made it." My mother's voice carried across the restaurant with practiced projection. Several diners turned to watch as she stood arms outstretched as if we were having a loving reunion instead of an ambush. "We were just telling Bethany's friends about your promotion. Department head at such a young age, we're so proud." The words felt like acid on my skin. Proud. They were proud now when there was money to be extracted. I stopped several feet from the table, maintaining distance like a detective at a crime scene. "What is this? What does it look like we're celebrating your success?" My father didn't even bother to stand, just raised his glass in my direction. "Surely you can afford to treat your family to one nice dinner. After all we've done for you." The manager cleared his throat, producing an itemized bill with the solemnity of a funeral director. "The total comes to $3,247, including service charges." He held it out to me, and I saw my parents had ordered the wine pairing with every course added caviar service, truffle supplements, and even a $500 bottle of champagne that was supposedly from some significant year. "I'm not paying this." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I haven't spoken to any of you in 6 months. I didn't authorize this dinner. I wasn't even invited." "How can you be so cruel?" My mother's tears appeared on cue, a performance she'd perfected over decades. "We're your parents, Alicia. We gave you life, raised you, sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay us, by abandoning us, by leaving us to struggle while you live in luxury." Luxury. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. "I live in a 1-bedroom apartment and drive a 10-year-old Honda. You stole my identity, ruined my credit, and took out loans in my name. The only luxury I have is not wondering what new debt you've created for me this week." Bethany's friends were filming now, phones not even discreetly held as they captured every moment. My sister finally spoke, her voice carrying that particular tone of condescension she'd mastered in childhood. "God, Alicia, you make $80,000 a year now. Just pay the bill. It's embarrassing. How do you know my salary?" But even as I asked, I knew. They'd been stalking my life, gathering intelligence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My father set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. "We know a lot of things. Like how you're planning a spring wedding at the Botanical Gardens. How David's family owns that medical supply company. How you've been looking at houses in Westmont. You've done very well for yourself by cutting us off. But family debts don't disappear just because you change your phone number." The threat hung in the air between us, and I felt my phone buzzing in my pocket. David responding to my panicked text, letting me know he was on his way. I needed to buy time, needed to think clearly despite the fog of manipulation threatening to cloud my judgment. "You told the restaurant I'd pay before I even got here," I said, directing my words to the manager, but loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. "That's fraud. You can't just order thousands of dollars of food and assign the bill to someone who wasn't present." The manager shifted uncomfortably. "They assured us you were coming, that this was planned. Did they mention I haven't spoken to them since they stole my identity? Did they mention the $15,000 they scammed from me? Did they mention this is the 3rd restaurant they've tried this at?" I was guessing on the last part, but the way Bethany's eyes widened told me I'd hit close to truth. My mother's tears intensified, her voice rising to ensure maximum audience participation. "Listen to how she speaks to us. We're not perfect parents, but we don't deserve this cruelty. All we wanted was one family dinner to reconcile, to heal. We thought if we met somewhere public, somewhere nice, she'd have to speak to us. So you decided to force me by creating a $3,000 hostage situation." I pulled out my phone, making a show of it. Should I call the police now? Or wait for you to dig yourselves deeper? You wouldn't dare, my father said. But for the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Try me. I have documentation of every fraudulent account you opened, every forged signature, every crime you committed with my social security number. I held back from pressing charges 6 months ago because some small part of me still believed you might actually love me. But this is just another scam, and you chose the wrong mark. The dining room had gone quiet, the kind of silence that falls when people realize they're witnessing something more significant than dinner theater. A woman at the next table leaned over and whispered something to her husband. A server hovering nearby had stopped pretending to adjust place settings and was openly staring. "We'll tell David's family what kind of person you really are," Bethany interjected, playing what they clearly thought was their ace card. "How you abandon family, how you're selfish and cold, how you'll do the same to him one day." "Tell them," I said simply. "Tell them how I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school while you got everything handed to you. Tell them how I survived on ramen while our parents spent my college fund on your wedding. Tell them how I'm selfish for not wanting to be robbed anymore. Please, I'm begging you, tell them everything." My mother's mask slipped for just a moment, real anger flashing through the performed tears. "You always were jealous of Bethany, always bitter that she was loved more. Maybe if you'd been more lovable, things would have been different." The words should have hurt. A year ago, they would have devastated me. But therapy and David's love had built armor around the softest parts of my heart, and I recognized the manipulation for what it was, a desperate attempt to trigger old wounds. "Maybe you're right," I said, surprising them with agreement. "Maybe I wasn't lovable enough. Or maybe you just weren't capable of loving more than one child. Either way, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not paying this bill. I'm not paying any bills. And if you continue to harass me, I'll pursue every legal remedy available." The manager looked between us, clearly trying to calculate which party was more likely to actually pay. My father, sensing the shift in power, changed tactics with the speed of a seasoned con man. "Fine," he said, standing slowly, using his height to try to intimidate. "We'll pay our own bill. But you're going to regret this, Alicia. Family is family. You can't run from blood. And when you need us, when your perfect little life falls apart, don't come crying to us." "I won't," I assured him. "Just like I didn't come crying when I needed parents who actually loved me. Just like I didn't come crying when you stole my future. Just like I didn't come crying when you chose money over your daughter every single time." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but David's arrival changed everything. He walked in with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted their worth, never questioned whether they deserved love, never had to earn their place in their own family. Behind him was Jennifer, still in her court suit from whatever case she'd been arguing, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic from family drama to legal matter. "Is there a problem here?" David asked, but his eyes were on me, checking that I was okay, offering support without overwhelming my autonomy. It was such a small thing, but after a lifetime of my parents' suffocating control, disguised as concern, his respect for my capability felt revolutionary. My father tried to reclaim control. "You must be David. We're Alicia's parents. We were just having a family dinner, getting to know our future son-in-law's family better. Tell me, does your family know that Alicia has a history of abandoning people who love her?" David's smile was pleasant in the way a shark's might be before it attacks. "Nice to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you. All of it admissible in court, I believe." The implications landed like a physical blow. My parents exchanged glances, their carefully orchestrated plan crumbling as they realized I hadn't come alone this time. Jennifer stepped forward, every inch the prosecutor she was, and I watched my family recognize her from news coverage of a recent high-profile fraud case. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, Alicia's attorney," she said, handing business cards to my parents and the manager with surgical precision. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about payment for this meal. My client didn't authorize these purchases, wasn't present when they were made, and has no contractual obligation to pay." Any attempt to collect from her would constitute fraud, and I'm prepared to file charges immediately. The manager's entire demeanor changed the possibility of legal action, apparently outweighing whatever story my parents had sold him. I see. Well, perhaps we should discuss this with the parties who actually ordered. But my parents were already retreating, their confidence evaporating as they realized their con had failed. Bethany's friends had stopped filming, suddenly very interested in gathering their purses and making excuses about early mornings. The audience they'd so carefully cultivated was turning against them, murmurs of disapproval rippling through the dining room. "This isn't over," my father said, trying for one last moment of control. "You think you've won. You think you can just erase us. We made you, Alicia. Everything you are is because of us." "No," I said, and for the first time in my life, I truly believed it. "Everything I am is in spite of you." The next 72 hours became a masterclass in desperation as my parents pulled every manipulative trick from their decades-old playbook. What they hadn't counted on was that I'd been studying that same playbook, preparing for this exact scenario with my therapist for months. Each move they made had been anticipated, discussed, and strategized against. But knowing the storm was coming didn't make standing in the middle of it any easier. It started before we even left the restaurant parking lot. My phone buzzed with notifications from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Aunt Linda from Phoenix, my father's sister, who only called when she needed gossip ammunition, had sent a voice message dripping with false concern. "Alicia, honey, I just heard from your parents. How could you humiliate them like that? They're absolutely devastated. Your mother is talking about checking herself into the hospital from the stress." By the time David drove me home, I had 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and a Facebook Messenger inbox that looked like a tornado had hit it. My parents had activated their flying monkey network with military precision, each relative given just enough information to be outraged, but not enough to understand the truth. "Let me see," Jennifer said, scrolling through the messages as we sat in my living room. David was making tea in the kitchen, the domestic normalcy of the action grounding me as chaos swirled through my digital life. "They're claiming you invited them to dinner to celebrate your promotion, then refused to pay creative." Completely contradicted by the restaurant's security footage, but creative. "They don't know about the footage," I said, exhaustion settling into my bones like concrete. "Oh, they're about to." Jennifer's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I've already requested copies from the restaurant." Amazing how cooperative they became when they realized they'd nearly been accessories to fraud. My mother's first direct attack came at 3 in the morning, because of course it did. She'd always known I was a light sleeper, had used it against me throughout childhood, with late-night arguments designed to leave me exhausted for school the next day. The pounding on my door was aggressive enough that Mrs. Patterson from across the hall opened her door to check what was happening. "Alicia Marie Chen, you open this door right now." My mother's voice could have shattered windows. "I gave birth to you, I have rights. You can't just throw us away like garbage." David was already on the phone with building security, while I watched through the peephole as my mother performed for an audience of my concerned neighbors. She'd dressed for the part of abandoned mother hair, deliberately mussed no makeup, wearing what looked like pajamas and a robe, despite the fact that she'd clearly driven here. "My daughter won't even speak to me," she wailed to Mrs. Patterson, who was clutching her own robe closed and looking deeply uncomfortable. "All I want is to see my baby. Is that so wrong? Is a mother's love a crime now?" "Ma'am, it's 3 in the morning, Mrs. Patterson said with the kind of firmness that comes from raising 5 children. "Perhaps you could come back at a reasonable hour." "Reasonable, nothing about this is reasonable. My daughter is keeping me from my grandchildren." "I don't have children." I called through the door, unable to let that particular lie stand. "Not yet, but when you do, you'll keep them from me. I know how you are, Alicia. Cold. Calculating. Just like your grandmother always said." It was a low blow, invoking my grandmother, who had been the only family member to ever truly see me. She'd left me a small inheritance when she died, just $10,000. But my parents had guilt-tripped me into investing it in Bethany's boutique business that mysteriously failed within 3 months. Grandmother would have been horrified to be used as a weapon against me. Building security arrived 2 large men who gently but firmly escorted my mother out, while she performed a Greek tragedy in the hallway. I apologized to my neighbors the next morning, bringing coffee and donuts as a peace offering, only to discover my mother had already been there, slipping notes under doors with my phone number, and a plea to help reunite a loving mother with her cruel daughter. The second wave came through Bethany, who had clearly been designated the reasonable one for this phase of attack. She showed up at my hospital during my lunch break, dressed professionally, looking every inch the concerned sister. I was paged to the lobby to find her chatting with the reception staff, laying groundwork for whatever scene she planned to create. "We need to talk," she said when she saw me loud enough for everyone to hear. "About Mom and Dad, about the money, about everything." "I'm working," I said, simply refusing to engage. "You're always working. That's part of the problem. You've become so obsessed with money and success that you've forgotten what really matters. Family." The irony of Bethany lecturing me about money was so rich I could have choked on it. This was the same person who had received a car for her 16th birthday while I got a card with a $20 bill. The same person whose college was paid in full while I worked myself into exhaustion. The same person who had a down payment gifted for her house while I saved every penny living off generic brand everything. "If you need to speak to me, you can contact my attorney," I said, turning to leave. "Really? You're going to lawyer up against your own family? God, Alicia, when did you become such a bitch?" The lobby went silent. Several of my coworkers were watching now, and I saw Dr. Martinez, my department head, step out of the elevator with raised eyebrows. This was exactly what Bethany wanted, to make a scene at my workplace, to embarrass me professionally, the way they felt I'd embarrassed them personally. "Leave," I said quietly. "Now, or I'll have security escort you out." "You'd do that, wouldn't you? Have your own sister dragged out like a criminal. Mom's right about you. You really are heartless." She left on her own, but the damage was done. I spent the afternoon fielding concerned questions from colleagues, assuring everyone that I was fine, that family drama wasn't affecting my work. Dr. Martinez called me into her office at the end of my shift, and I braced for a lecture about keeping personal matters out of the workplace. Instead, she handed me a tissue and asked, "Do you need some time off? Or perhaps we should review the hospital's workplace harassment policies." The unexpected kindness broke something loose in me, and I found myself crying in my boss's office, overwhelmed by the simple act of someone in authority taking my side. She listened as I gave her the abbreviated version of my family situation, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "I want you to file a report with HR," she said when I finished. "If they show up here again, we'll have them trespassed. And Alicia, I know it might not feel like it, but you're handling this remarkably well. Lesser people would have paid that restaurant bill just to make it stop." The third attack was the most sophisticated. My father had always been the strategist of the family, the one who thought 3 moves ahead, while my mother provided the emotional manipulation. He'd clearly spent the days since the restaurant incident crafting something special. The email came to my work address, CCing David, his parents, Dr. Martinez, and several members of the hospital board. The subject line read, "Regarding Alicia Chen's mental health and fitness for position," and I felt my blood turn to ice water as I read it. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting and manipulation. He expressed grave concerns about my recent erratic behavior and detachment from reality. He cited my unfounded accusations about identity theft, my paranoid delusions about family members trying to harm me, and my violent threats at the restaurant. He included selective screenshots of text messages edited to remove context, making it appear I was the aggressor in every interaction. The coup de grace was his revelation that I had a history of mental instability, requiring intervention in college, complete with dates that coincided with when I'd been working 3 jobs and struggling to stay afloat. He painted a picture of a daughter spiraling out of control, a danger to herself and others, whose recent promotion had triggered a manic episode requiring immediate intervention. David's parents called within minutes of the email landing, not to question me, but to offer support. "We've already forwarded this to our legal team," his mother assured me. "This is clearly defamation, and we won't stand for it." Dr. Martinez's response was even more direct. She called a meeting with HR and legal where I presented the full documentation of my parents' fraud, the police reports, the credit monitoring alerts, everything Jennifer had helped me compile. What my father hadn't counted on was that I'd been preparing for exactly this kind of attack, building a paper trail that told the real story. I think what the hospital's legal counsel said after reviewing everything: we need to discuss a restraining order. This level of harassment has crossed into dangerous territory. The email backfired spectacularly. Instead of destroying my credibility, it revealed the lengths my parents would go to maintain control. David's parents, who had been prepared to welcome my family with open arms despite my warnings, now understood why I'd cut contact. The hospital board member my father had included, who happened to be a former victim of identity theft himself, was particularly sympathetic. But the most painful betrayal came from an unexpected source. My parents, in their desperation, had reached out to someone I'd confided in during my darkest moments, my college roommate, Emma. She called me crying, apologizing before she even explained why. "They contacted me on Facebook," she said, her voice thick with guilt. "They said you were having a breakdown, that they needed information to help you. I didn't tell them much, but Alicia, I mentioned that time sophomore year when you were so overwhelmed you talked about dropping out. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. It's not your fault," I assured her, even as another piece of my past became ammunition against me. "They're very good at this. They've had 28 years of practice." The escalation reached its peak when Jennifer called with news that changed everything. "They've been busy," she said, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "I've discovered at least 6 new credit applications in your name just this week. They're not even trying to hide it anymore." "What?" I sank onto my couch, David's hand immediately finding mine. "Credit cards, a car loan, even an attempt at a second mortgage on a property you don't own. It's amateur hour stuff getting flagged immediately thanks to the freezes we put in place, but it shows escalation. They're desperate and making mistakes." "Can we prove it's them?" "The car loan application included your mother's cell phone number as the contact. Like I said, amateur hour. But Alicia, this is good news in a twisted way. They've handed us everything we need for a criminal case. The question is, are you ready to take that step?" I thought about 28 years of manipulation, of gaslighting, of being told I was never enough while being used as a personal ATM. I thought about the therapy sessions where I'd sobbed over feeling unlovable, the relationships I'd sabotaged because I couldn't believe anyone would stay without wanting something from me, the success I couldn't enjoy because I was waiting for someone to take it away. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like freedom. "I'm ready." The war had begun in earnest, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting alone. And my parents were about to learn that the daughter they'd raised to be a victim had become something far more dangerous, a survivor with nothing left to lose. The breaking point came, as these things often do, from an unexpected direction. We had gathered at Jennifer's office to review the criminal case building against my parents when her assistant knocked urgently. "There's a Bethany Chen here. She says it's an emergency and she needs to speak to Alicia immediately." My sister looked nothing like the polished woman who'd confronted me at the hospital just days ago. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her usually perfect makeup streaked with tears, and her hands shook as she clutched a manila folder like a lifeline. For the first time in our lives, Bethany looked as desperate as I'd felt all those years ago. "They did it to me, too," she said without preamble, sinking into a chair across from us. "Everything they did to you, they've been doing to me. I was too proud to see it, or too stupid. God, Alicia, I'm so sorry." Jennifer exchanged a look with me, her lawyer instincts clearly on high alert. This could be another manipulation, another angle of attack. But something in Bethany's eyes, a recognition I knew too well, made me lean forward. "What happened?" Bethany opened the folder with trembling fingers, spreading out credit card statements, loan documents, and bank records across the conference table. "After the restaurant, when you refused to pay, Dad was furious. He said we needed to accelerate the timeline. I didn't understand what he meant until he asked me to sign some papers. When I hesitated, he told me the truth." "Which truth?" Jennifer asked, carefully, already taking notes. "All of it. That my college was paid for with Alicia's fund. that my wedding was financed with her student loan money, that the down payment for my house came from credit cards in her name. I thought, God, I actually thought I was the favorite, that they loved me more. But I was just easier to control, easier to keep in the dark. The room fell silent as Bethany continued pulling out documents. Each one revealed another layer of deception, another theft, another betrayal. But these weren't just crimes against me. My parents had been playing both sides, using my credit to fund Bethany's life, while simultaneously stealing from her too. This car loan, she pointed to one document. I thought I was the primary borrower. Turns out I'm the cosigner. They've been making minimum payments for 2 years, just enough to keep it from defaulting while destroying my credit. And this, she pulled out a business registration. Remember my boutique, the one that failed? It never failed. They've been running it online under my tax ID, keeping all the profits while I claim the losses. David whistled low. They've been running a shell game with both of you. It's worse than that, Bethany said, finally meeting my eyes. Remember when Grandma died? They told me you got $10,000 and wasted it. Told me that's why I didn't get anything, because Grandma saw how irresponsible you were with money. They told me to invest it in your boutique, I said slowly, pieces clicking into place, which they then used as a front for their own business. Alicia, I never saw a penny of that money. They played us against each other our entire lives, making us compete for scraps while they took everything. Jennifer was typing furiously on her laptop. This changes the nature of the case significantly. We're not looking at isolated identity theft anymore. This is organized fraud, tax evasion, possibly RICO violations if they've been using the business for money laundering. There's more, Bethany said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Mom's gambling problem. It's not just a problem. She owes people. Bad people. The kind who showed up at my house last week looking for her. They knew my address, my work schedule, my daughter's daycare. You have a daughter. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Bethany had a child I didn't even know about. Lily? She's 3. I never told you because Mom said you'd try to turn her against me. Said you'd poison her mind with lies about our family. But they're the ones who've been poisoning everything. They're the poison. The full scope of our parents' betrayal was staggering. As Bethany laid out document after document, a pattern emerged that was both horrifying and oddly validating. Every family story I'd been told was a lie. Every narrative about my failures and Bethany's successes had been carefully crafted to keep us separated, competitive, and easily manipulated. The medical emergency, I said suddenly. The $15,000. Was Mom even sick? Bethany laughed bitterly. She was at a spa. I remember because she came back with a new nose and told everyone she'd had polyps removed. Dad made me promise not to tell you because you'd be jealous of the attention she was getting. Jennifer called in her paralegal to help catalog the evidence Bethany had brought. As we worked, my sister shared story after story, each one recontextualizing our entire childhood. The Christmas when I got books while she got jewelry, my parents had charged both to my credit, telling her I was too intellectual for nice things. The summer camp she attended while I worked, paid for with my name on a loan, they're still making minimum payments on. I need to know, Bethany said, looking directly at me. Can you forgive me? Not for them, but for me, I was horrible to you. I believed every lie they told. I treated you like competition instead of a sister. You were a child, I said, surprised by the lack of anger in my voice. We both were. They shaped us into weapons to use against each other. That's not your fault. I wasn't a child at the restaurant. I knew something was wrong, but I was so deep in their web that I went along with it. I thought if you'd just pay, everything would go back to normal. Normal was the problem, David interjected gently. Normal in your family was abuse. As the afternoon wore on, more truth emerged. My mother's gambling debts exceeded $100,000. My father had been fired from his job 2 years ago, but hadn't told anyone, maintaining the illusion of employment while living off credit cards in both daughters' names. They'd refinanced their house 3 times each time, pulling out equity that disappeared into the black hole of their addictions and schemes. "We should call the police now," Jennifer said after reviewing the complete picture. "This is beyond civil litigation. We're looking at multiple felonies, interstate fraud, tax evasion, and potential connections to organized crime through the gambling debts." But Bethany had one more bomb to drop. "There's something else. Last night after I confronted them about everything, Dad got drunk. Really drunk. And he told me about the others. Others, my blood ran cold. Other family members, cousins, aunts, uncles. Anyone who trusted them enough to share personal information. He has a notebook, like a ledger of everyone he's gotten social security numbers from, credit information, anything he could use. He was bragging about it, saying it was his insurance policy. The scope of the fraud was breathtaking. My parents hadn't just stolen from their daughters. They'd turned identity theft into a family business, targeting anyone who got close enough to trust them. The image of my father keeping a ledger like some sort of criminal accountant was both absurd and terrifying. "We need that notebook," Jennifer said immediately. "It's evidence of a much larger criminal enterprise. Bethany, would you be willing to wear a wire?" "No," I said before Bethany could answer. "That's too dangerous. If they're connected to people who would threaten a 3-year-old, we can't risk it." "I'll do it," Bethany insisted. "They trust me, or at least they think I'm still under their control. If I play along, pretend I'm on their side against Alicia, I can get the notebook." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "You have Lily to think about." "I am thinking about her. What kind of life will she have with grandparents who see her as a future Mark? What happens when she turns 18 and they need a new identity to steal? No. This ends with us." Jennifer suggested a compromise. "We'll work with law enforcement. They can provide protection and guidance. This is bigger than a family dispute now. This is organized crime." As we prepared to leave the office, Bethany caught my arm. "There's one more thing. Something I need to tell you, but didn't want to say in front of lawyers." I waited, watching my sister struggle with words. "The night you were born," she finally said. "I was 4. I remember Mom bringing you home from the hospital. Dad took me aside and told me you were going to take everything from me. That I had to be better, smarter, more lovable, or you'd steal my place in the family. I was 4 years old and they were already turning me against you. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Bethany, I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I need you to know that I loved you once, before they taught me not to. That little girl who was excited to have a sister, she never completely went away. And I'm hoping maybe we can find her again." We hugged then properly for the first time in over a decade. It wasn't a magic moment that erased years of pain and manipulation, but it was a start. 2 sisters realizing they'd been casualties in the same war, finally fighting on the same side. When we emerged from the building, I was surprised to find David's parents waiting with him. His mother immediately pulled both Bethany and me into a hug. "David told us what's happening. You're both staying with us tonight. No arguments." "I couldn't impose," Bethany started, but David's father cut her off. "You're not imposing. You're family. Real family. The kind that doesn't keep ledgers of people to rob." As we drove to their house in 2 cars, Bethany following with David while I rode with his parents, I got a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. "You've made a mistake crossing us. Both of you." I showed it to David's mother, who patted my hand. "Let them threaten. They're scared now, and they should be." She was right. My parents had spent decades building their house of cards, carefully balancing lies and manipulation to maintain their control. But houses of cards have a fatal flaw. Pull one card and everything collapses. And we hadn't just pulled one card, we'd set the whole deck on fire. The next morning arrived with the kind of chaos that only a full-scale family crime investigation can bring. I woke in the guest room of David's parents' house to the sound of multiple phone notifications and Lily's laughter from downstairs. It was surreal hearing a child's joy in the midst of our family's implosion, but also strangely healing. This was what family was supposed to sound like. By the time I made it to the kitchen, Detective Morrison had already arrived and was sitting at the dining table with Jennifer, several file boxes of evidence spread between them. Bethany was there too, Lily on her lap, trying to feed breakfast to a 3-year-old while simultaneously providing her statement to law enforcement. Miss Chen. Detective Morrison stood as I entered, extending his hand. I've been reviewing the evidence your attorney and sister provided. I need you to understand what we're looking at here is extensive. Your parents appear to have been running a fraud ring for over a decade. How extensive? I asked, accepting coffee from David's mother with grateful hands. We've identified at least 17 victims so far just from the initial review. Family members, coworkers, neighbors, anyone who trusted them enough to let their guard down. He pulled out a photocopy of what looked like pages from a notebook. Your father was meticulous. Names, social security numbers, credit information, even passwords and security questions. It's like a how-to guide for identity theft. The notebook Bethany had risked everything to retrieve was worse than we'd imagined. My father had treated crime like a business, complete with profit-loss statements and victim profiles. There was a page for me started when I turned 18, tracking every account, opened every loan, taken every dollar stolen. The clinical nature of it made my stomach turn. This page, Detective Morrison pointed to another entry. Is your cousin Michael. According to our records, he filed for bankruptcy last year, claiming identity theft, but unable to prove who was responsible. Your father has notes here about maximum extraction achieved and moving to secondary targets. Secondary targets? Bethany asked unconsciously, holding Lily tighter. Their children. He has a section labeled Future Assets with birth dates of various family members' kids, including... He paused, glancing at Lily. Including your daughter. Her information is already partially filled in. The room went silent except for Lily's babbling about her cereal. The idea that my father was already preparing to steal from his own granddaughter, that she was just another entry in his criminal ledger, made me physically ill. We need to move fast. Detective Morrison continued. Word travels in families, and once your parents realize we have this notebook, they'll likely try to run. We have teams standing by to execute arrest warrants, but I need both of you to understand what happens next. This will be public. Media will likely get involved. Your extended family will be contacted as victims. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the family reunions where I was painted as the difficult daughter, the cousins who believed I was selfish and cold, the aunts and uncles who tisked about my abandonment of my parents. They were all about to learn they'd been victims too, that the Harold and Diane they defended had been robbing them blind. Do it, I said. They've hidden behind family loyalty long enough. The arrests happened simultaneously at 9:30 that morning. My mother was at her weekly hair appointment, my father at the casino where he spent most mornings now. Both locations were public, ensuring plenty of witnesses to their removal in handcuffs. Within an hour, it was on the local news. My phone became unusable from the flood of calls and texts. Extended family members who hadn't spoken to me in years were suddenly very interested in talking. Some were angry, assuming I'd fabricated evidence against my parents. Others were shocked pieces of their own financial struggles suddenly making sense. A few were grateful, finally having answers about mysterious debts and ruined credit. Cousin Michael called in tears. I lost my house, he said. My wife left because she thought I was hiding debt from her. I've been living in my car for 6 months, and the whole time it was Uncle Harold. Aunt Linda, who'd been one of my parents' biggest defenders, sent a text that simply said, I'm sorry, they got me too. Can we talk? But the most painful call came from my grandmother's sister, Great Aunt Rose. At 91, she was the family matriarch, the one person whose opinion everyone respected. I knew something was wrong. She said, her voice shaky but determined. When your grandmother died, she told me to watch out for you. Said Harold had darkness in him. I should have listened. I should have protected you girls. The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. Local couple arrested in decade-long family fraud scheme, read the Chronicle's headline. Someone leaked my father's notebook to a reporter, and images of his meticulous victim tracking went viral. The story had everything media loved: family betrayal, extensive fraud, and victims who'd suffered in silence for years. David's parents hired a security firm to monitor their house after reporters started showing up. Bethany and Lily stayed there while her apartment was processed as a crime scene, investigators looking for any evidence my parents might have hidden there. The intrusion into our lives was absolute but necessary. 3 days after the arrest, I was called to identify evidence at the police station. Box after box of documents, credit cards, fake IDs, and loan applications. My life laid out like a crime scene, which I supposed it was. The detective walked me through each piece, building the case that would hopefully put my parents away for years. This credit card, he pointed to a familiar-looking piece of plastic, was opened when you were 22. They used it exclusively for online gambling sites. Maxed out at $20,000. I was working 3 jobs then, I said numbly. Living on ramen and peanut butter sandwiches while they were gambling with my future. This loan application is particularly interesting. They listed you as the owner of a business that doesn't exist, claimed income you never earned. It's not just identity theft anymore. It's fraud, forgery, tax evasion, and money laundering through the fake business entities. The scope kept expanding. Federal investigators joined the case when it became clear my parents had crossed state lines with their crimes. The IRS launched their own investigation into the tax implications. What started as a family dinner confrontation had become a multi-agency criminal investigation. The family fallout was swift and brutal. Those who'd been victims immediately cut all contact with my parents. Those who hadn't been targeted yet split into camps, those who believed the evidence, and those who insisted it was all a misunderstanding. Family Facebook groups became battlegrounds of accusations and denials. My father's brother, Uncle Robert, posted a long defense of his brother, claiming I was a vindictive daughter making false accusations. Within hours, 3 cousins responded with their own evidence of identity theft, complete with police report numbers. Uncle Robert deleted his post and hasn't been heard from since. The financial consequences for my parents were immediate. Their assets were frozen pending investigation. The house they'd refinanced multiple times was revealed to be underwater on its mortgage. Their car was repossessed when it was discovered the loan was in my name. Everything they'd built on the foundation of other people's credit crumbled within days. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence came from an unexpected source. The country club where my parents had maintained membership for 20 years, presenting themselves as successful professionals while stealing from their own children, voted unanimously to revoke their membership. The letter, which someone helpfully forwarded to me, cited conduct unbecoming of club standards and fraudulent representations in membership applications. Bethany and I met with prosecutors to discuss our testimony. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Patricia Hernandez, who reminded me of every tough but fair nurse manager I'd ever worked with, laid out the case plainly. With the evidence we have, we're looking at 15 to 20 years for each of them. The notebook alone shows premeditation and organization that elevates this beyond simple fraud. But I need to know you're both prepared to testify. They'll have good lawyers. Those lawyers will try to paint you as ungrateful daughters, as conspirators, as anything but victims. Are you ready for that? I looked at Bethany, saw my own determination reflected in her eyes. We're ready. The trial date was set for 6 months out, giving both sides time to prepare. My parents were released on bail with ankle monitors, restricted to a small apartment since their house was in foreclosure. The conditions of their bail prevented them from contacting any victims, including their daughters. That didn't stop them from trying. They sent letters through their lawyers, each one a masterpiece of manipulation. They were sorry. They were sick. They needed help, not prison. They loved us. They'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to lose everything. Each letter was forwarded to the prosecutor as evidence of continued harassment. The day I returned to work after a week of dealing with the investigation, I was nervous about facing colleagues who'd seen my family drama play out in the news. But I'd underestimated the nursing community. My unit had decorated my locker with supportive notes. Dr. Martinez had arranged for hospital security to have my parents' photos in case they violated bail. My colleagues closed ranks around me, protective and fierce. Anyone who can survive your parents can handle anything this cardiac unit throws at them, one of the older nurses told me. Besides, we've all got family. Maybe not criminal family, but family nonetheless. The support extended beyond work. David's parents formally invited Bethany and Lily to stay with them, indefinitely turning their guest suite into a proper apartment. My future in-laws, who'd once worried I came from a difficult family situation, now became the family we'd never had. You know what the best revenge is, David's mother said one evening as we all sat around their dinner table. This, family dinners where no one's plotting anything, bedtime stories for Lily where no one's teaching her to mistrust her cousin, love without ledgers. She was right. As I watched Lily fall asleep on Bethany's shoulder, trusting and safe, I realized my parents had failed in their ultimate goal. They'd tried to poison our ability to love and trust, to turn us into versions of themselves. Instead, their cruelty had eventually driven us together, forging a bond stronger than any they'd ever attempted to break. The consequences of their crimes would follow my parents for the rest of their lives. But Bethany and I, we were finally free to discover who we could be without their influence. And that was a consequence they'd never calculated in their careful notebooks. 6 months passed in a blur of legal preparation therapy sessions, and the slow rebuilding of 2 lives that had been shattered by the same hands that should have protected them. But while my parents sat in their court-mandated apartment plotting their defense, Bethany and I were busy constructing something they'd never thought possible: lives built on truth, trust, and genuine family bonds. The transformation started small. Bethany enrolled in night classes to finish the business degree she'd abandoned when our parents convinced her she wasn't college material. I watched her study at David's parents' dining table, Lily coloring beside her, and saw echoes of my own desperate nights fighting for an education. But this time, she wasn't alone. David's mother watched Lily during classes. I helped with homework. David's father, a successful businessman, offered real-world insights that our parents' schemes had never provided. "I can't believe I'm actually understanding this," Bethany said one night, looking up from her accounting textbook. "Dad always said I was too pretty to need brains, that my job was to marry well and let men handle the money." "Same dad who kept criminal ledgers in a notebook," I reminded her. "Maybe his advice isn't worth much." We laughed, but it was tinged with sadness. Every achievement, every step forward came with the shadow of realizing how much we'd been held back. But shadows, we were learning, only existed where light was trying to shine through. My own rise was quieter but no less significant. Without the constant drain of my parents' crisis and manipulation, I found energy I didn't know I had. My work performance, already strong, soared to new levels. I implemented a new patient care protocol that reduced cardiac unit readmissions by 15%. Dr. Martinez nominated me for a prestigious Nursing Leadership Award. For the first time in my life, success didn't come with the fear that someone would take it away. The hospital administration, initially concerned about the media attention surrounding my family, became my strongest advocates. The CEO herself called me in for a meeting I thought would be about damage control. Instead, she offered me a newly created position, Director of Patient Advocacy and Financial Protection Services. "We've realized," she said, sliding the offer across her desk, "that financial abuse, particularly of elderly or vulnerable patients, is more common than we thought. Who better to lead a program protecting our patients than someone who understands predators intimately?" The salary increase was substantial, but more importantly, the role gave my pain purpose. I would use what my parents taught me about manipulation and fraud, not to perpetrate it, but to prevent it. Within 3 months, our program had identified 12 cases of suspected financial elder abuse and connected families with resources. Bethany's rise was more dramatic. Armed with her new business knowledge and freed from our parents' sabotage, she relaunched her boutique concept. But this time, it was real. No shell companies, no hidden debts, no stolen funds. She started small, selling carefully curated vintage pieces online, building a reputation for authenticity in both her products and her story. From fraud to fashion, How I Rebuilt After My Parents Stole Everything became her most read blog post, going viral in entrepreneurship circles. Orders flooded in from people who connected with her story of resilience. Within 4 months, she'd made enough to rent a small storefront, painting it bright yellow because life should have color after so much darkness. The opening day of Bethany's boutique was emotional for both of us. David's parents were there, of course, treating Lily like the granddaughter they'd never had. My colleagues from the hospital came in force, buying enough to ensure a successful first week. But the moment that broke us both was when Great Aunt Rose arrived, 91 years old, and fierce, wearing her best dress. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she said, handing us each an envelope. Inside were savings bonds she'd been holding since we were children, hidden from our parents' grasp. She knew this day would come, when you'd be free to become who you were meant to be. The trial date approached like a storm on the horizon, but we were no longer the scared, isolated victims we'd once been. Jennifer had prepared us thoroughly, conducting mock cross-examinations that were brutal in their precision. We practiced staying calm when defense attorneys accused us of greed, ingratitude, and conspiracy. We learned to let facts speak louder than emotions. Remember, Jennifer coached us, "They're going to try to make this about family loyalty. Your job is to make it about facts. Every document, every forged signature, every stolen dollar. That's what matters in court." But life didn't stop for trial preparation. Lily started preschool choosing a backpack with butterflies because they start out stuck, but then they fly. The metaphor wasn't lost on any of us. David and I finally set a wedding date, choosing a small ceremony at his parents' home rather than the elaborate affair my parents had once tried to sabotage. "I want our marriage to start with truth," I told him as we addressed invitations. "No debts, no secrets, no shadows from the past." "The past made you who you are," he replied, addressing an envelope to Bethany with Lily's name carefully included. "I wouldn't change that, even the painful parts. They brought you to me." 3 weeks before the trial, I received an unexpected call. Marcus Hamilton, a documentary filmmaker, wanted to feature our story in his series about family financial fraud. His previous work on elder abuse had won awards, and he promised to handle our story with respect. "It's not just about your parents," he explained over coffee. "It's about the system that enables this kind of abuse. How family loyalty is weaponized. How victims are silenced by shame. Your story could help thousands of others recognize the signs." Bethany and I discussed it at length. The publicity would be intense, but we'd already lived through the worst exposure. If our story could prevent one person from suffering what we had, wasn't it worth it? We agreed with conditions. Lily wouldn't be filmed. The focus would be on recovery, not just victimization. And any proceeds would go to a fund for identity theft victims. Filming began immediately following us through trial preparation and daily life. Marcus was respectful but thorough, asking questions that made us examine our experiences from new angles. One afternoon, he asked me something that stopped me cold. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" I sat with that question for a long moment, watching through the window as Bethany taught Lily to ride a bike in David's parents' driveway. "Forgiveness isn't about them," I finally answered. "It's about me. I forgive the parts of them that were broken, probably by their own parents. I forgive the sickness that made them see their children as resources instead of people to love. But forgiving isn't forgetting, and it certainly isn't giving them access to hurt us again." The documentary crew captured moments of our new life that felt almost too precious to share. Bethany helping me choose my wedding dress, both of us crying as she adjusted the veil. Me teaching Lily to write her name, her tiny fingers gripping the pencil with determination. Family dinners where conversations weren't strategic manipulations, but genuine connection. They also captured the harder moments. Bethany's panic attack when a customer at her boutique resembled our father. My hands shaking as I reviewed victim impact statements. Both of us in therapy working through trauma that went deeper than stolen money. The financial abuse was almost easier to prove, our therapist observed during a joint session. Emotional abuse doesn't leave paper trails, but it leaves scars just as deep. 2 weeks before trial, we received word that our parents had been negotiating plea deals. The weight of evidence was overwhelming, their attorneys advised. Better to accept responsibility and hope for leniency than risk maximum sentences at trial. The prosecution called us in to discuss the possibility. They're willing to plead guilty to all charges, Patricia Hernandez explained. In exchange, they're asking for concurrent rather than consecutive sentences. We're talking 8 to 10 years instead of potentially 20 to 30. What do you recommend? Bethany asked, unconsciously reaching for my hand. Trials are traumatic. You'd have to testify, be cross-examined, relive everything publicly. A plea deal spares you that. But it's ultimately your decision. What matters more, the length of their sentence or your peace in moving forward? We asked for time to consider. That evening, sitting in the boutique after closing, surrounded by beautiful things, honestly earned we made our decision. The number of years mattered less than the acknowledgement of guilt. We'd accept the plea deal with conditions. Full restitution to all victims. Lifetime restraining orders. And they had to allocute admitting in open court to every crime. I want to hear them say it, Bethany said firmly. No more lies. No more manipulations. They have to tell the truth publicly at least once. The prosecution agreed to our terms. The trial date became a sentencing hearing. We prepared our victim impact statements, the final chapter in this part of our story. The night before the hearing, David's parents hosted a dinner they called family meeting. All the chosen family we'd built gathered around their extended table. My colleagues from the hospital, Bethany's first customers who'd become friends, Jennifer who'd become more than just our attorney, Great Aunt Rose, matriarch of the family we were rebuilding. Tomorrow will be hard, David's father said, raising his glass. But look around this table. This is what rises from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. Love without ledgers, trust without tricks, family by choice, not chance. We toasted, and I felt the truth of his words settle into my bones. My parents had tried to teach us that family was about obligation, manipulation, and transaction. But around this table sat proof of their greatest failure. They'd pushed us so far into darkness that we'd had no choice but to find our own light. And in finding it, we'd discovered something they'd never understood. Real wealth wasn't measured in stolen dollars, but in honest relationships. Tomorrow we'd face them one last time. But tonight, surrounded by genuine love, I realized we'd already won everything that mattered. The morning of sentencing arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. I stood before my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my best suit, the one I'd bought with my first paycheck from the patient advocacy position. David appeared behind me, wordlessly fixing a strand of hair that had escaped my careful styling. In his eyes, I saw reflected all the strength I'd need for the day ahead. Bethany was already at the kitchen table when we emerged, Lily on her lap, eating cereal while wearing her favorite butterfly dress. My sister had chosen a simple navy dress, professional, but not severe. We'd discussed our courtroom attire at length, with Jennifer understanding that even these small details mattered. We wanted to appear as what we were, successful professionals who'd thrived despite our parents' crimes, not because of them. "Mommy, why are you and Aunt Alicia dressed so fancy?" Lily asked, milk dripping from her spoon. "We have an important meeting today, sweetheart," Bethany answered carefully, "with some judges who help make sure people follow rules. Like my preschool rules, no hitting, no taking toys. I'll make her nasa hindi ti sport namin." Yes, I said, struck by the simplicity of truth from a 3-year-old's perspective. Exactly like that. No taking things that aren't yours. The courthouse steps were crowded with media when we arrived. Marcus and his documentary crew had been given special permission to film inside, but the other reporters had to content themselves with shouting questions as Jennifer and a security detail hustled us through. I kept my eyes forward, Bethany's hand in mine, drawing strength from our united front. Inside the courtroom, the gallery was packed. Victims from my father's notebook filled several rows, faces I recognized from family reunions, now marked by the same mixture of anger and sadness I carried. Cousin Michael sat in the front row, finally housed again thanks to the restitution fund the court had established. Aunt Linda was there, tissues already in hand. Great Aunt Rose sat regally in her wheelchair, wearing the same dress she'd worn to my grandmother's funeral, a silent message about endings and justice. My parents entered from a side door, and I felt Bethany's sharp intake of breath. 6 months of house arrest had aged them dramatically. My mother's perfect hair was gray at the roots, her designer clothes replaced by a simple pantsuit that hung loose on her diminished frame. My father, always so commanding in his presence, seemed to have shrunk, his shoulders curved inward as if carrying invisible weight. They didn't look at us. Throughout the proceedings, they kept their eyes fixed on the table before them, even when the judge asked them to rise. Harold Chen and Diane Chen. Judge Morrison read, her voice carrying the weight of authority. You have pleaded guilty to 47 counts of identity theft, 23 counts of wire fraud, 18 counts of tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Before I pronounce sentence, you will allocute to your crimes. Mr. Chen, please begin. My father stood slowly. For the first time in my life, I watched Harold Chen without his mask of superiority. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. I stole from my family. I used my daughter's social security numbers to open credit accounts. I forged their signatures on loan documents. I created false businesses in their names. He paused, swaying slightly. I kept records of family members' personal information with the intent to commit fraud. I taught my wife how to manipulate credit systems. We used the money for gambling, personal expenses, and to maintain a lifestyle we couldn't afford. Each admission felt like a physical release pressure, leaving my chest with every truth finally spoken aloud. Beside me, Bethany wept silently, not from sadness, but from the catharsis of hearing reality acknowledged after decades of gaslighting. My mother's allocution was harder to hear. Where my father's voice was flat, hers trembled with what sounded like genuine emotion. I stole from my daughters before they were old enough to understand credit. I convinced Alicia to take out loans under false pretenses. I used money meant for their education for my gambling addiction. She finally looked up, finding us in the gallery. I chose money over motherhood. Every time. The victim impact statements began with other family members. One by one, they detailed the destruction my parents had wrought. Lost homes, destroyed marriages, bankruptcies, dreams deferred or abandoned entirely. The scope of pain was staggering, but so was the resilience on display. These people had survived, rebuilt, and come to bear witness. When Bethany's turn came, she walked to the podium with remarkable grace. Lily waved from David's mother's lap, and Bethany smiled before beginning. Our parents stole more than money. She read from her prepared statement. They stole our ability to trust, our sense of worth, our relationship as sisters. They taught us that love was transactional, that family was about exploitation. For 25 years, I believed their lies. I participated in their schemes against my sister because they convinced me it was normal, even necessary. She paused, looking directly at our parents. But here's what you didn't steal: our ability to heal. Our capacity to love genuinely. Our strength to break the cycle. My daughter will never know the kind of love you showed us. She'll never compete for affection or earn her worth through manipulation. Your legacy ends with us. When my turn came, I felt the weight of 28 years of words unsaid. The statement in my hands represented dozens of drafts, each one attempting to capture the complexity of loving parents who'd never truly loved you back. In the end, I'd chosen simplicity over eloquence, truth over rhetoric. I was 18 when you started stealing from me. I began my voice stronger than I'd expected. But the theft began much earlier. Every time you told me Bethany deserved more. Every time you made me feel guilty for basic needs. Every time you chose favorites and pretended it was love. The financial crimes you're being sentenced for are just symptoms of a deeper theft. You stole our childhood, our innocence, our ability to believe we were worthy of unconditional love. I looked at them then, these strangers who'd raised me. but I want to thank you for one thing. Your cruelty taught me to recognize real kindness. Your manipulation showed me the value of truth. Your conditional love helped me appreciate the unconditional love I've found elsewhere. You gave me a PhD in what family shouldn't be, which prepared me to build something better. The judge called a recess before sentencing, and the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations. My parents' attorney approached Jennifer whispering urgently, but she shook her head. Whatever last-minute plea they were attempting, it was too late. When court resumed, Judge Morrison's expression was stern, but not without compassion. The pre-sentencing report makes for difficult reading, she began. The defendants systematically exploited those who should have been able to trust them most. They turned family bonds into weapons, love into leverage. The financial damage exceeds $1.5 million across all victims, but the emotional damage is incalculable. She looked at my parents. However, the court also acknowledges that both defendants suffered similar exploitation in their own childhoods. The cycle of abuse in the Chen family appears to span generations. This context doesn't excuse your crimes, but it does inform sentencing. My heart sank. Were they going to receive leniency because they'd been victims too? Beside me, Bethany grabbed my hand. That said, the judge continued. You had opportunities your own parents didn't. Access to education therapy resources. You could have broken the cycle. Instead, you perfected it, turning family fraud into an art form. You kept ledgers of future victims, including your own granddaughter. You showed no mercy to your daughters, and this court finds little reason to show you more than the minimum required by law. Harold Chen, I sentence you to 10 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will pay full restitution to all victims according to the payment schedule established by the court. Diane Chen, I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release with the same restitution requirements. The gavel fell with finality. 10 years. 8 years. It felt both too long and not long enough. But as I watched my parents being led away in handcuffs, I realized the actual sentence didn't matter. They'd lost everything that mattered: their freedom, their reputation, their family. Most importantly, they'd lost their power over us. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had intensified. But something had shifted in me during the hearing. I no longer felt the need to hide from our story. When a reporter asked how I felt about the sentence, I answered honestly. I feel free, I said simply. For the first time in my life, truly free. The documentary crew followed us to a nearby park where we'd agreed to film final interviews. As Lily played on the swings, her laughter carrying on the spring air, Marcus asked us to reflect on what came next. Healing isn't linear, Bethany said, watching her daughter soar. There will be bad days, triggers, moments when the old voices creep back in. But look at her. She pointed to Lily. She doesn't know that grandparents are supposed to be threats. She doesn't know that love is supposed to hurt. We did that. We broke the pattern. What would you say to someone trapped in a similar situation? Marcus asked me. I thought carefully before answering. Document everything. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Know that family isn't a license to hurt you. And understand that leaving pressing charges, protecting yourself, that's not betrayal. That's survival. And you deserve to survive. The weeks following sentencing brought unexpected peace. Without the looming threat of trial, Bethany and I could focus fully on building our new lives. Her boutique thrived, becoming a gathering place for women who'd overcome their own traumas. My work at the hospital expanded to include speaking engagements about recognizing financial abuse. We'd become accidental experts in a field no one wanted to need. 6 months later, I married David in his parents' backyard. Bethany stood as my maid of honor, Lily as our flower girl scattering petals with enthusiastic abandon. Great Aunt Rose officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Our chosen family filled the chair's faces, beaming with genuine joy, untainted by hidden agendas. Do you know what I see when I look at you? David asked during our vows, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. I see someone who took the worst thing that could happen and transformed it into purpose. Who chose love when hate would have been easier. Who built trust from the rubble of betrayal. I see my hero, my partner, my family. As we danced at the reception, Bethany pulled me aside. I have something for you, she said, producing a small wrapped box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with 2 charms butterflies like the ones on Lily's backpack. To remind us, she said as she fastened it around my wrist. We started out stuck, but now we fly. The documentary aired 8 months later to critical acclaim. The hardest part was watching our story play out for strangers, but the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of emails poured in from people recognizing their own situations in our story. Support groups formed. Legislation was proposed to make family financial fraud easier to prosecute. Our pain had become purpose on a scale we'd never imagined. One email stood out from the rest. It was from a woman named Catherine whose parents had been stealing from her for years. She'd seen our documentary, recognized the patterns, and finally found the courage to investigate. The email ended with 5 words that made every difficult moment worthwhile. Thank you. You saved me. On the first anniversary of the sentencing, Bethany and I met for coffee at our favorite spot. So much had changed. Her boutique had expanded to 2 locations. I'd been promoted to vice president of patient services. Lily was thriving in kindergarten, confident and secure in ways we'd never been. David and I were expecting our first child, a boy we'd already decided to name after his grandfather, not mine. Do you ever think about them? Bethany asked, stirring her latte thoughtfully. Sometimes, I admitted. Mostly I think about the lessons. How they taught us exactly what not to do. How their failures became our roadmap for success. I got a letter, she said quietly, from Mom, through her lawyer. I haven't opened it. I wasn't surprised. We'd both received several letters over the months, all forwarded through attorneys, all unopened. The restraining orders prevented direct contact, but they'd found ways to try reaching us. I don't need to know what it says, Bethany continued. Whether it's real remorse or more manipulation doesn't matter. We're past needing their words. She was right. The little girls who desperately craved their parents' approval had grown into women who'd learned to validate themselves. We'd found families who loved us without ledgers, success earned through honest work, and most importantly, we'd found each other. As I write this final chapter of our story, Lily is 8 years old. She knows her grandparents exist but are in timeout for breaking important rules. It's an explanation that satisfies her child's sense of justice while protecting her from details she's too young to process. Someday we'll tell her the whole truth, armed with the lessons we've learned about breaking cycles and choosing love. Bethany and I often joke that we should thank our parents for being such spectacular failures at parenthood that they accidentally taught us to be better. But the truth is more complex. They were broken people who broke others rather than healing themselves. They were victims who chose to become victimizers. They were parents who saw their children as resources rather than responsibilities. Their legacy could have been generational trauma passed down like a cursed heirloom. Instead, it became generational healing started by 2 sisters who refused to accept that this was just how families worked. We chose therapy over theft, honesty over manipulation, love over ledgers. To anyone reading this who recognizes their own family in our story, know this. You are not crazy. You are not ungrateful. You are not obligated to accept abuse because it comes from blood relatives. You have the right to protect yourself, to press charges if necessary, to build boundaries that keep you safe. Family is not a license to harm. The money my parents stole was eventually partially recovered through restitution and civil suits. But the real recovery wasn't financial. It was learning to trust again. Learning to accept help without suspicion. Learning that love doesn't require payment, and that the best families are often the ones we choose. My parents will be eligible for parole in a few years. The thought no longer terrifies me. They've lost their power because we've claimed ours. Whatever they do with their remaining years, wherever they go when they're released, they'll do it without access to us. The butterfly daughters they tried to pin down have flown far beyond their reach. Sometimes in quiet moments, I wonder who we might have been if we'd had different parents. Would Bethany have been more confident earlier? Would I have been less driven, less desperate to prove my worth? But those wonderings are brief. We are who we are not despite our parents, but because we chose to be more than what they tried to make us. The last time I saw them was at sentencing, but I see their influence everywhere, not in who I am, but in who I refuse to be. Every honest conversation is a rebellion against their lies. Every act of unconditional love is a rejection of their transactions. Every time I trust someone, I defeat their legacy a little more. This is how generational trauma ends, not with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but with daily choices to be better. It ends with Lily laughing freely, never wondering if she's loved enough. It ends with sisters who text each other funny memes instead of competing for scraps of affection. It ends with chosen families gathering for holidays where the only agenda is joy. It ends with freedom. And that freedom, that's priceless. To those who've walked this path before us, thank you for showing it was possible. To those still trapped in the cycle, know that escape is possible, healing is achievable, and you deserve both. To our parents, if they ever read this, we hope you find healing too, but we won't wait for it anymore. Our story began with a $3,000 dinner check they tried to force on me. It ends with something worth infinitely more lives lived authentically, love given freely, and futures unlimited by the past. They gave us trauma. We transformed it into triumph. And that's the ultimate plot twist in this family drama. The victims became victors not through revenge, but through resilience, not through hatred, but through healing. We didn't just survive our parents. We thrived despite them. And in the end, that's the most powerful response to abuse. Choose healing, choose boundaries, choose yourself. The rest will follow. As Lily would say, we were stuck, but now we fly. And the view from up here, it's spectacular. What would you do if your own family tried to destroy your future for their gain? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience and triumph. Remember, family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up for you without keeping score. Thank you for witnessing our journey. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never apologize for protecting yourself. Until next time, keep flying high above those who tried to clip your wings.